NATO and Allied Joint Training Movement and Transportation Chapter 2, Movement and Transportation Organization, Section Responsibility, Organization, Relationship 201, Purpose. The purpose of the chapter is to describe the responsibility of Allied national military staff in the area of movement and transportation. General, the movement and transportation, integral aspects of military operations, assist commanders and military authorities in carrying out their tasks and responsibilities. Specialized movement and transportation personnel should be integrated with the staff of the commands at a level. All levels of national will control all aspects of their own lines of communication with the movement and transportation resources unless they are made other than arrangements. In doing so, the nations will account for the agreed operational priorities set out by their NATO commander. The NATO command structure manages rather than control movement. The management of the movement will depend on the situation, operational level, whole, partially embraced with the following functions. Initiation, multiple national movement. The planning is initiated by the movement for a conference shared by the NATO commander. The prioritization movement is prioritized according to the NATO's commander's operational requirements. Coordinated national detailed deployment plans are and coordinated with the combined multiple national deployed detailed deployment plans by the Allied movement, coordinated with the Century, AMCC, and the OPLANs for the contingency planning COPS. Deconfliction, the appropriate NATO commander deconflicts the movement and cooperation, sending, leading, and host nations. Coordinated resource, the NATO commander facilitates and cooperative shared use of the transportation resource facilities and infrastructure. 6. Monitoring movement. The movement is monitored with the appropriate NATO commander in order to determine the status of the take of the remedial measures in cooperation with the nations, and if required, with the 203 NATO and motive and transportation structure. Figure 2.1 and 2.2 illustrates the general items of two different options using either the integrated NATO command structure or the combined joint task force structure. Alright, Alright, here you have the NATO headquarters with the coordinated line to the sending nations and also to the Allied command operations. That's if required. The Allied command operations go to the level of the national support element or the joint force command in a direct command and control, sending nations and the Allied communicated operations are between the in between them is the National Movement Coordinated Center and the National Movement Center 2. In between the Joint Forces Command and the National Support Element with the multiple Joint Logistics Center between the Joint Force Command and the National Movement Coordinated Center 2. The Joint Force Command goes into Headquarters Land, Motor and Transportation Staff, the Component Command, Motor and Transportation Staff, the Component Command, Air and Motor and Transportation Staff. Alright, structure based on Combined Joint Task Force. The NATO headquarters either goes into a coordinated, if required, by the sending nations and the Allied Command Operations. The Allied Command Operations brings into three lines, which is the Joint Force Capabilities, Section 2, National Movement and Transportation, Sending of the Nation, and the Sending Nation, the National Support Element of the Sending Nation responsible for the planning, controlling, execution of the movement is national forces, national component of the multiple national head groups of the unit of the head degree of the multiple national Sending Nation has agreed to assume the lead nation responsibility for other nations of the other nations if agreed. Organization, the motive of the transportation organization varies between the nations. The efforts are coordinated through the respective Ministry of Defense with the AMC and the Army Movement of the Command Century with the Theater of the Nations for the National Support Elements coordinated with the requirements of the National Movement Coordinated Center in the host nation or the Joint Forces Commander. The task responsibility to develop a national detailed deployment plan allied with the deployment and movement of systems atoms based on an allied disposition list and including the designated NATO commanders and priorities control the movement of the national force, national components, multiple forces take into account with the designated NATO commanders' operational requirements, determine the movement of the requirements, make necessary for the transportation of agreements that work with the Army, the Allied Material Command, Sentry, and identify the shortfall, surplus, and national movement and transportation resource to meet the alliance movement and requirements, respond to requests to develop, execute the range, and the cooperative use of the lift of the operations of the other nations in order to move overall the nation NATO principal priorities, and see Appendix B, the coordinated civil military transportation resource and support of the national as required by Allied forces, provide the national liaison augmentation of the Army, the Allied movement of the command and Sentry as necessary to the national movement controlled Sentry of the host nation. National support element. The mission of the national support element under the national control support coordinated for the RSMO transportation for the same redeploying force with the host nation appropriate NATO commander is required. Organization varies for the nation. The nation of operation size of the unit may vary for the section C as detached and battalion of the or larger task responsibility are at the discretion of the sending nation. Host nation and national movement is coordinated with the Sentry. Mission. The host nation with ultimately authority to approve the coordinated with the control over the sending and ordering movements of related activities sovereign with authorities. Operation for the host nation will be conducted in accordance with the NATO commander's priorities for the host nation support agreement. Exemption for the defined force deployment area and are based upon the agreements or memorandums of understanding and approval to coordinated with the control of the movements will delegated partially and totally with the joint force command organization with the motor and transportation organization. Difference between the nations of the national movement coordinated with the Sentry. It should be established within coordinated movements of special sending nation the joint force control coordination, air traffic control due to regard to have been given in the existing agreements, rules, regulation, multiple national, military, civilian, air traffic control and task responsibility. Establish the national movement coordinated with the Sentry to appropriate executive movement to control organization of the following tasks. The responsibility coordinated with the control sea, air, and land surface of the movement of the host nation territory is taken into account with the design nation commander's priority of the sending the nation's requirement to control, support, execute these portions of the RASM plan, which has been made with the close coordinated with the design joint force capabilities and sending nations. Identify the SC for the SAS motor and transportation resource infrastructure and the support for the operation, establish and implement the arrangements coordinated with the neighboring nations, facilitating border crossing procedures, control, facilitate use of national civil military transportation resources, personal facilities, equipment, and infrastructure, national alliance support, provide liaison and augmentation for the Allied movement control Sentry as necessary, establish required links for the organization responsible for air, space, and sea route control. The lead nation take leading in planning, controlling deployment, transportation, sustainment, redeployment, as well as the obtaining transportation resources. Multiple national headquarters groups and units conduct either partial or total task responsibility for the host nation in case for the non-host nation authority exists. The agreement of the sending nation and host nation take the lead in performing specific motive movement and tasks as we're going to identify with the NATO in cooperation with the nation's organization with the order required for the above mentioned. The mission discretion from the nation assumed with the lead nation responsibility task responsibility identical with the sending nation or the host nation task with the responsibility. However, the lead nation responsible to establish arrangement of compensation reimbursement for the use of lead nation functions of all parties involved. Section 3, NATO movement and power movement and transportation structure. NATO headquarters and agencies, internal staff, international staff, international military staff, international military assist deployment planning and execution, providing with political military guidance for attaining the timely arrangement of the transit, deploying the forces through the national territory necessary. Senior NATO Logistics Center Conference for the Senior NATO Logistics Conference, CNLLC, coordinated with the Authority of Logistics responsible for coordinating harmonization of the deployment and implementation alliance of movement and transportation comm policy and concepts. Movement and Transportation Group, supported by the Senior NATO Logistics Conference with regard to movement and transportation concepts. The Senior Civil Emergency Planning Committee, the Senior Civil Emergency Planning Committee, throughout the Transportation Planning Boards of the committees that support the NATO military authorities by advising the ability and using civil transportation resources related with the infrastructure support of the NATO-led operations by assisting in the acquisition of civil resources by harmonizing and standardizing civil procedure relating to the transportation for the defense purposes and additional information, civil expertise addressed in Chapter 8. NATO Maintenance and Supply Agency. The NATO Maintenance and Supply Agency can provide with the contracting assistance to the Allied movement of control, consentry, and or nations required. NATO Standardization Agency. The established movement and transportation working groups panel with the NATO Standardization Group agency developing the mode of transportation Allied publication standardization agreements and the standardization agreements of the Allied project or other offered nations the ratification and implementation in order to use the same standards increase into operability. 208 Allied Command Transformation, movement and transportation branch for the headquarters of Strategic Allied Command Transportation, coordinated with the management of the military movement and transformation activities on behalf of an alliance initiated research technology efforts and explored development from motive and transportation capability. Organization headquarters is SACT, and then motive and transportation is located with the Resource Logistics Division. Task responsibilities: to manage, coordinate movement and transformation activities, to advise the ACTC change of the movement and transportation related matters, and enhancing the transformation, movement, and transportation capabilities. Alliance coordinate with the movement and transport business process capabilities requirement for the headquarters of NATO shape. ACO, NATO agencies, nations appropriate with the NATO committees, including the Senior National Logistics Center. Command, motor, movement, and transportation group, the transportation of public board and chairs, to document the movement and transportation business process capabilities and identify the current shortfalls, initiate managed effort to develop the improvement of the motive and transportation process capabilities, offer improvement recommendation for the alliance, initiate, manage, and evaluate the motive and transportation concept development and experimentation project, the capability packages, and work with the alliance to implement accessible solutions. Develop motive and transportation aspects of strategic concepts and policy and doctrine to identify individual motive and transportation training requirements, managing movement and transportation training course of the development and execution. 2.9 Allied Command Operations, ACOs. Allied Command Operations Supreme Headquarters of Allied Powers in Europe, or shape of the movement and transportation personnel. The Allied Movement Corridor Center, which was managed the strategic movement that encompasses the overall deployment of transportation system and redeployments, as well as defined the ADL, which is also included designated NATO commander requirements, objectives, priorities in the respect of the Army Allied Movement Command Century in cooperation with the nations, constructed with the multiple national detailed deployment plan and address strategic lift of shortfalls in performance with the task list and peacetime exercises operation. Organization, the Allied Command Operation, the mode of the transportation, personnel, compromise, the peace establishment of the Allied movement of the command criteria. The crisis establishment would require the augmentation of movement of the transportation staff of the NATO commands and agencies and operational liaison officers of special source nation, host nation, or transportation public boards and chairs could augmentation with the Allied movement and control century as required. Tasks and responsibilities: to act as the motive and power transportation interface between the SC and the nation's external agency, including the European Union commercial transportation market, could be effective with the NASMA and transportation PB and Cs. To oversee operational use and deployment of the necessary items, the flow of the movement of data and national detailed deployment plans in support of exercise and contingency operations, to serve the primary motive and transportation point of the contact nation, NATO military authorities. To review priorities, deconflicting, coordinated with the deployment, redeployment plans from the NATO and non-NATO forces to support exercising operations, to use atoms of the flow of the movement of data to construct the multiple nations with detailed deployment plan in support of the exercise operations. If requested, the nation to facilitate the acquisition, management, commercial, military, transportation assets, to identify the movement and transportation tasks, lead nation support, seek agreement for the nation to accept these tasks, to action transportation request for all the possible situations to provide requirements possible with the movement and training possible, seeing doctrine to monitor the execution and deployment provided with the nation's relevant information of the overall movement and transportation situation so the adjustment can be made. You assist designated the NATO commander with the resolve of the movement and transportation issue might require support and decisions from the sending nation to action transportation request the NATO commander for the lift assets the organization and facility shared with the strategic transportation assess. 210 Joint Air Power Completion Century 211 Joint Force Command CJM4 Movement and Transportation Staff Mission. The Joint Force Command Movement and Transportation Staff is developed implementation movement and transportation directive to prioritize movement requirements and then apply with the Joint Force Command task. The movement and transportation staff is focused on all exploration aspects of operational movement of the region that coordinated with the host nation organization. Movement and transportation staff with the Joint Force Command headquarters of the CJ Force staff task responsibilities. Develop, implement, motive in the transportation directive task responsibility procedure for the host nation subordinate headquarters within the region. Develop, motive and transportation plans as they apply to the Joint Force Command task. Choose the deployment of the Chief Joint Task Force headquarters of the cooperation nominated lead nation nominated as the parent headquarters to maintain necessary functional source of documentation of the Joint Force Command with border crossing points, military route numbers, to coordinate with the nations of the SC and CCs within the region required to coordinate with the provided augmentation of NATO motive and transportation structure is required to recommended with the Allied movement of the control century is required with the changes concerning the force deployment and desired order of arrival or transportation for sustainment and redeployment to monitor, evaluate, provide contingency assessment with the commander of the chief Joint Force Command with the deployment with the movement and transportation with the AOR. If required, provisional functional control of the MTCC where the MJLC has been established. Alright, headquarter land movement and transportation staff. The headquarter land movement and transportation staff developing the movement and transportation plan directive priorities movement that requires the joint operation areas as applicable to the joint force employment. Organization movement of the transportation is headquarter land of the CG4 staff. Task responsibility, develop, deployment, movement and transportation plans, priorities, movement requirements applicable to joint force employment with the joint air or operation areas to be recommended with the change of the concern with the force deployment, the desired overall, etc. The transportation sustainment, redeployment of joint force stability in the SC to coordinate with the movement of the transportation is applicable to the joint operation area with the host nation and national NMCC and National Support Element in the Allied Movement Control Century of the Joint Force Command Movement and Transportation Staff. To approve the coordinated with control all the movements related with the employment force to define the operational area, the area should be defined with the appropriate op plan based on the agreements of the host nation to provide representation of the NMCC as applicable in order to coordinate with the movements of cooperation with the nations to provide augmentation of the NATO movement and transportation and structure required, if required, to provide a function for the MTCC if no MJLC has been established. Headquarters combined with the Joint Task Force and the Joint Theater Movement Staff. The mission is the Joint Theater Movement Staff develops the motive and transportation plans, priorities, movement requirements of the theater organization. Joint Theater Movement Staff can be positioned with the CGA3 or CGA4 for the CGTF or the Combined Joint Task Force doctrine described in the Joint Task Management Theater Movement Staff establishment. Task responsibility to serve the COMCJ Joint Task Force. Combined Joint Task Force focus the deployment of the motive and transportation combined Joint Task Force the comms combined Joint Task Force operation area to develop the motive and transportation procedure for the combined Joint Task Force and mission to contribute with the combined Joint Task Force CG5 operational planning process, the movement and transportation operation checking feasible plans to apply the operations old priorities execution movement and transportation function to monitor evaluate provide continuous assessment of the comms combined Joint Task Force to develop movement and transportation situation of the joint operations area. Recommendation of the Allied Movement Control Century required with the change of control to force the deployment with the disorder and arrival to transportation for sustainment and redeployment to determine the action with the requirement to move the transportation assist the facilities to serve the need with the function of the Chief Joint Staff's mission, coordinate necessary movement of the transportation issue through the joint operation area with the name MCC, the lead nation, the national supporting element, component commands, and coordinate with the liaise with the CJ9 civil cooperation, century, non-governmental organizations, and international organizations in respect of movement and transportation issues to provide function with the MTCC is established, provide with the name the MCC is applicable in order to support the coordinate with the movement between the nations in accordance with the Command and Joint Task Force operational requirements. If in absence of the host nation and lead nation, the MCC, the Joint Task Mission support the responsible NATO additional movement and transportation. The support may require the nation through the fourth generation process. Zero 0214 Movement and Transportation Coordinated Cell. Establish the movement and transportation coordinated cell management of the transportation resources owned by or assigned with the Joint Force Commander of the shared use throughout the theater, and is also coordinated with the transportation request of the international organization or not national government organizations validated with the civil military cooperation century, and is an absence with the host nation and lead nation MCC. It'd be tasks executed with the intra-theater movement. What was it? Was it MTCC? Is established when transportation resources are owned but assigned with the Joint Force Command but the shared with the usable availability must be and managed with the requirement that the movement of control exists with maybe part in multiple national joint logistics century or maybe under the CJ4 the multiple nation joint logistics century is not established. The movement transportation command century is compromised with the personnel provided with the primary between the nation chief of the motor transportation command century serving the key nucleus points of the multiple nation joint logistics century peace establishment and the multiple movement transportation multiple nation transportation command century functional direction of the joint task mission movement standards of the CJ4 movement and transportation as reported. In case of execution movement and control, additional movement and transportation personnel support will be required with the nation throughout the fourth generation process. Task responsibility to serve with the central 3 point of the contact with all the requests passenger cargo airlift support provided by NATO EU with the NATO intra-theater airlift system to serve the central theater lifting point of the contact coordinated with the tasking service transportation provided by NATO and shared with the user and ally and the multiple national integrated logistics unit. Serve the central theater point of the contact coordinated with the transportation request of the international organization national government-owned, validated with the CEMEC century to monitor the support of the national-owned with assigned transportation resources to acquire through the regional allied contracting office, RACO human host nation support coordinated with the cell movement and transportation resource facility service directed with the movement and joint transportation and management to execute intra-theater movement control of the absence of the host nation and lead nation of the MCC. Regional airlift coordinated regional airlift coordinated century. The regional airlift coordinated century will plan coordinated with execute control air transportation within the joint operation area. The regional airlift coordinated century is established integral with the air operation century and combined with the joint force air component command and structural defined in the Allied Joint Publication 337. Task responsibility to schedule the task airlift with the joint operational area based on the Joint Force Command with the Command Cooperation Joint Task Force approved with the priorities validated with the aircraft airlift requirements. To allocate slot times arrival department for the transportation aircraft airfield, the joint operation area, the response request for the nations, I appropriate the NATO commander, integral airlift, the aircraft activity of operation humanitarian disaster relief operations flights. To publish air transportation schedule as portion of the air tasking operation. Landing component command, movement and transportation staff. The landing component command, movement and transportation staff provide the movement and transportation coordinated with the land component command, joint area of operation. Organizational land command of the movement and transportation will be under the TJ4 with a just located with the is and best coordinated with the movements of the area on operation. Task responsibility: the conduct operation movement to plan with the land component command of the areas of operation, deconflict with the surface of movement of the areas of operation in conjunction with the host nation, lead nation, sending nation, appropriate higher, lower headquarters to assist rectifying national transportation shortfalls, brokering between the national contingency of the area of operation to monitor, report, movement, and transportation activity to the higher headquarters as required to manage the transportation resources owned with the assigned Joint Force Capable Command for the share of the through the authorized to advise the assistant national contingency for the movement of transportation asset facilities acquisition contracting matters. Maritime Component Command, Advanced Logistics Support Site, and Forward Logistics Sites. The Advanced Logistics Support Site, Logistics Support, and multiple national maritime forces, the primary transportation shipment point of personnel, mail, and cargo, designated to and to from a float with the floor. Forward Logistics Site serves the same with the mission support of the Advanced Logistics Support Site, but on a smaller scale with the most forward point of resupply. Organization: the Advanced Logistics Supported Site and the Forward Logistics Supply or multiple national logistics support sites will be established by the MCC organization, tailed with the operation manning is provided by the nation of the Allied Advanced Logistics Support Service Site and the Forward Logistics Site, coordinated with the control of multiple nation logistics commander with the maritime, the temporary detachment supported with the equipment and personnel, either the host nation located be created with the multiple national contributed duration exercise operation advance for the manager of the Advanced Logistics Support Site and the Forward Logistics Support Site. Operation structure can be found with the logistics publication. Task and responsibility: execute the movement of the MCC, PMC, medical casualties, designated joint operation area, directed by the MNLCM. The exercise to take on all power equipment and its assigned to the Advanced Logistics Support Site and the Forward Logistics Support Plate, cargo to airlift, cargo detachment, vertical onboard delivery, allied the Joint Logistics Support Site. And Forward Logistics Site, medical facilities, and MC Logistics fixed-wing rotary aircraft, shuttle tankers, material handling, equipment trucks, Echelon 2 and 3, and ashore medical support. To coordinate as directed by the MNLCM, the MTCC for the intra-theater with the airlift system scheduled with the PMC movement to serve the transportation support multiple national integrated logistics unit or other multiple national provided with the assistant provided with the coordinate with the host nation maritime related with the motive and transportation issues. To coordinate with the Regional Allied Logistics Support Center, the RALCC, schedule the MNLCM Organic Support Aircraft, coordinate the MNLCM and National Support Element on priorities of the PMC. Chapter 3, Planning and Guidance.